these graduate attributes. But also for doing that, that's only one part of it. The other part of it is actually giving them, building their capacity to be able to deliver on it at the other end. So it's about trying to bring those two together. And I think that's something I think that we need to work on. And I think if we could do that better in our programs, rather than trying to hammer it in or tag it on, I think it has to be integrated from the beginning. So it's just become something of what we do. And it automatically emerges from the experience that students have as they do.
I'm going to ask David maybe to respond to your comments on Generation Z.
Absolutely. So I want to kind of invert Shakespeare a little bit. I come not to bury Generation Z, but to praise it. The idea of what this generation, the post-95 generation, the widespread birth of the internet generation has is exactly what we've all said. They have access to ubiquitous information and connection that we simply did not. And so that is a massive change and will require a different thought and environment as to how we convey information. But I think getting at that as an issue that can be solved with 1 or 2 or 3 or 12 particular thrusts is something that can be challenging if your thrusts don't match that particular pattern. So part of what I was trying to introduce is the idea that, to back off, or to write off of what Terry said, let's invert the lens a little bit. We have all these studies of what generations do from 40, 50, 60-year-old perspectives. None of it looks at us, except for a few. And you know what we actually ask students what to do when they look at us? What do we ask? What do we ask them? How are we as teachers? So we automatically get a role that has value and authority when we're asking them to evaluate us. They are independent of agency or job or function. They are of a generation. So let's change that around and get an idea of who are they and look at it as a parallel point of view, the way that Catherine was telling me before. She had a bunch of students come in and it's Catherine, it's not Doctor. I sit with you, I engage with you. That's where the theoretical framework can be helpful, because regardless of your context, you can look at it. If it's digital, then you have to do a lot more work to create those connections and create that support mechanism, and not because right now I have eye connections with all of you. I can read your body language. If you're interested or not, can't do that online. So that's one of the changes, and that's why I like having a framework to go forward with something.
Okay, and maybe Rachel, do you want to respond to some of that? Because you talked about Generation X and Y previously.
Yeah. Well, I suppose and it comes back to that conversation about the 85% of students doing stuff. And I think, you know, in higher education we have 2 roles. We have the role of education, but we also have the role to give a voice to society for people who are outside of the academy, those people who are not going to come into the university, and that's a huge proportion. As I said, we are talking about a very privileged class when we are talking about Generation Z. But also within those classes, I think, you know, and if there is the 10 million, I think the building of resilience and the capacity to say that it's okay if I'm not outside college and to have paths, whether that's apprenticeship, you know, so if somebody isn't, you know, if the careers advisor says to somebody, listen, maybe this isn't you, but there is something else, I think to look at other paths. I think we need to be the voice for that excluded group that is part of Generation Z, but not in the labeling process that we are doing. And I also think we have to be mindful of the fear that the students have, and it comes back to this risk. With, you know, when David is right, autonomy is such an important thing, but autonomy is also a huge layer of baggage for a very young person to deal with. And when you have lots of information and society is telling you, you have universal opportunities to go to higher education now, if you don't do that and you don't succeed, then all of that comes on you and you as an individual. And I think that's why we're seeing such heightened levels of suicide, such heightened levels of anxiety. And I think we as an academy, as higher education, globally have to look at ourselves and say, well, what are we doing to contribute or to help in that? And what are we doing in terms of giving people the freedom to fail, to acknowledge the failure as a part of life, to acknowledge that not everybody is going to be part of the 1%, but what about the 99%?
Very good. Terry?
Yeah, it's to follow up what you said and also on what you said. So in terms of the online space and that sort of personal touch, and it's regardless, when we ask students about who their teaching hero was, that person that they remember, we had 4,500 responses, 250 words, we analysed them. Do you know the 3 words that came up? Care, time, and help. Not brilliant technology? Not at the first 3 words. It wasn't about the brilliant technology, it wasn't about all of that. It was the fact that they, at that moment when they needed care, time and help, there was somebody there to actually provide. And I think it's about recognizing ways of how we can do that in different ways, whether it's online, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in our classrooms. But it's interesting that was it. It wasn't, he was fantastic with the technology that he gave me, or we had a brilliant work placement. Yes, they were important, but engaging after care, time and help, that thing of making it real, making what you're teaching me have relevance to my life, to what's actually happening outside. And I think that's, when you're talking to our students and they're saying, well, actually, this is what makes my hero, I think we need to listen to what they're saying.
Very good. Just get Pierre maybe to follow. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it just goes back to, I don't know, around teacher, student. I think you have to probably go back to basics. I realise they're a human being, they're a person. Do we need to characterise them as a student the same way do you need to characterise yourself as a teacher? And be like, you're a person, you're here to receive an education, but maybe what is it that you want, what is it in for yourself, Are you just there because, you've been forced to from your parents or from society's expectation that you should come to college, come to university, because otherwise if you don't have a degree or if you don't have an education, you can't go anywhere. And that's also from society. Sometimes you can't get a part-time job, you can't get anything if you don't have your leaving cert, if you don't have a degree or anything like that, you can't get, because the expectation of society that you need some form of education in order to succeed. But maybe just get down to the basics, like I'm really understand that actually, no, this is not for me, this is not what I want, I just want to ride around in tractors and that will make me feel happy, or I'd rather just not be a doctor if that's what because my parents were doctors, or things like that. Just the pressures around when you just need to go back to the individual and understand really what is it that makes them happy, because most of all that the value, we go about like, does money make you happy and everything like that, but we really need to understand what is it that makes you happy. Is what makes you happy being in college, what makes you being happy as an individual, and what makes you happy in life, and trying to figure that out also, and not create that barrier in terms of like, maybe bring it back to things like, if you want to understand how technology works or how to be more digital, maybe it's the students that now need to teach all of us, teach the lecturers like how you should actually teach. You may have all the knowledge, experience, you've done your degrees, you've done your trainings and how to be a lecturer, but if you're using like technology and you don't really know how to use it, let's now flip the table and say, okay, the students, how do you want me to teach you in this way? Like you're the lecturers today. I'm going to sit down and listen to you, and you teach me how you want to be taught in order for this to work much better. So maybe, not that you're all going to be out of a job right now.
Just Peter being provocative there. Okay, I have, I think Peter was going to make a comment.
Yeah, Peter from the Career Development Centre. Just a few comments, picking up on some of the points that have been made and so forth. And I reference our own head of service, Dave Kilmartin, who uses the line often that if you knew you couldn't fail, what would you do? When that idea of success. So particularly when we're working with first-year students and the people who perhaps are in the wrong space, the wrong area, the wrong time, the readiness, whatever it might be, if you knew you couldn't fail, what would you do? But often that idea of fail, I think, is kind of what's that predefined, like who's defining fail. If I had freedom of choice to do what I was doing, or if a student had freedom of choice, but the reason they're staying, like you say, is it parental, is it society, what is the reason that I'm actually here, that I don't have the freedom to actually try things out and go different directions. So I think it's kind of interested in terms of that, creating that environment has been mentioned several times about allowing that freedom to experience, freedom to fail, freedom to try things, or freedom to walk away, or freedom to do something entirely different that might not be in what's the perceived kind of, even generationally, what's the perceived, do it differently to what everybody else is supposed to be doing as my generation or so forth. The other couple of points was in the whole idea of delivery, technology coming into it and so forth, but the idea of delivery, if we change our names from teachers, from lecturers, to, I don't know, learning facilitators or something like that. That idea that my role is to come in, yes, I do have knowledge, I do have expertise, but it's my role to come in and tell you everything I know, or as has been mentioned, is my role to come in and to step in and just facilitate that collaborative learning environment. And David, I think you mentioned that point about, the autonomy, that it's ownership, it's bought in, it's people learning collectively, feeling engaged with each other, with the systems, and so forth, that they feel ownership of the task. So, and then when I look towards digital and technology coming into that fore, I often wonder in terms of, I see so many people going and, oh, I came across this tool, I came across this online tool, this, that and the other, and we should try this, we should do this, I attended this session, and so forth. And as always we can introduce it, but the question obviously is should we introduce it? I'm thinking about the different learning styles. And anything that in terms of I suppose in terms of technology, anything that enables. When you talked about the 10 million, and we're back to that again. But the first thought that came into my head was spending the 10 million on systems that allow flexibility. I don't know, does that make any sense? Is that it doesn't come in as an advocate to introduce technologies and encourage everybody and be advocates of saying everybody has to engage with this technology and everybody has to move this way. But if we spent the 10 million on creating environments that played to the different preferences in terms of students and their learning styles and the way they want to engage it, not just tell them this is the only way that you can engage with this information and this topic. It's kind of the idea that was in my head, because I just don't think there is different ways in which they're learning. Anyway, just a few thoughts on it.
And if I was Terry, I would want to respond. Do you want to respond to that? Yeah.
I think you're right, but you have to, the other thing that you have to recognise is that it's very institutionally context-based, and particularly it's very discipline-based with the students. So the work, the unit of change is at that level of the discipline and probably down to the program team. That's where you have the autonomy to actually make these kind of changes and to actually enable your students, within their discipline to actually, I suppose, have the best learning experience for maximum learning or impact. It's about improving the student experience, and it's about the learning impact on that. But that's the unit of change from all our work is down at the discipline, right down at the discipline level. Heads of school or institutions themselves can't do it. It has to be much lower down.
Okay.
Can I make one very short point?
Okay, and then I've Jen.
Sorry, apologies, Jen.
And then I've you.
Oh, you go first.
No, you carry on.
The points you made in terms of need, care, etc. As a lecturer and a coordinator, because of the system that's in place now, where we will be funded based on the numbers of students that graduate, okay? So therefore there is a push to increase the number of students. In terms of the Hunt report and other various reports that are out there, we are also looking at, particularly in terms of TU for D, the efficiencies in terms of bringing classes together, where there is overlap in certain discipline areas. So we're going to have larger classes. As a coordinator and a lecturer, I can care, I can look after, I can engage, I can communicate with 40, 50 students perhaps. Once it goes over 70, 80, I'm 95 in another class. Very difficult, okay? And that to me is a critical issue, okay? The size of classes are increasing, okay? So therefore I would love to be able to, okay? But it is absolutely impossible to do that once the number increases above, within a certain group. Okay, that's just, to me, the reality of it, okay?
Okay, we might come back, and can I just, maybe just put my other hat on, and as someone who's involved in planning of Grange Gorman and TU for D, I've never heard of those economies of scale of getting larger class sizes as a driver. I've heard it as an argument that we, something that we really need to avoid. So I hope
so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I've Jane and I've the gentleman at the back then. So Jane, you first.
Okay, just linking into the TU for D and Grange Gorman and the opportunities it affords to us, and apologies to people that aren't any of the three institutions involved, and maybe I must be going to too many of these meetings recently, but there is a really good opportunity to do something really different, and it kind of strikes me that we have the possibility to rethink what education is about, to rethink who our students are, and to take away some of the pressure that there is on current students. I'm aware recent Weaving cert and all the media hype around and about that, there's this focus on that you have one-off opportunities in life, and if you fail at that, that's you sort of in a route, track to ruin or whatever, which puts horrendous pressure in that. Similarly with choices round about going to college, and there's a larger group of people coming into college, and we tend to treat them in one particular way, although well-intentioned. If there wasn't so much of a focus on this one-off opportunity for all of these things, then we were a lot more flexible round about provision. We can be catering, and I suppose technology links into this as well, we can be catering for the tractor driver that doesn't want to come into college. We can use technology, we can rethink who does the teaching, who supports. We could have mentors out in industry. We can rethink to more apprenticeship models of teaching, so that any time you can engage in third level sort of education. Because there's a lot of people, like a lot of parents sometimes are quite frustrated they never got to third level institutions themselves, and they put a lot of pressure on their own children as well to succeed because they never did. Wouldn't it be great to really have lifelong learning so that anybody could come in whatever age and be part of this community? It will give a great diversity within the student population. And no disrespect to Generation Z, but it would be great to be in the TU for D and expanding out to have a truly lifelong learning module, which is all the staff, and it's a pleasure to support a lot of the academic staff in DIT because they're really motivated to learn. And that in itself, if you have really motivated learners within a class, is so inspirational motivation in itself. So I do think that with the TU for D, we do have this opportunity to do something different. And part of it is rethinking who the students are and to think about what education is about. And to take away a lot of the pressure that there actually is at the moment to succeed, because if you haven't succeeded in your early 20s, and that's it. So anyway, that's my rant.
Would anyone like to comment on that, or?
No, I think it's true. I think we're operating in an old system prior to the risk society that we live in now, and we've moved to an individualised society that none of our structures or institutions have. And yeah, TU does afford us that opportunity. I think we are still in a rigid, fixed system, and Generation Z, X, Y, and Boomers are all living in a fluid. Nobody knows 5 years now what jobs are going to be the jobs. Nobody, the path of people having houses, having families, having this career path is all juxtaposed by our structures and stay the same. So I totally agree. And it's a rare opportunity for the TU and French government to have an opportunity to restart, to restart and think about it.
And technology will help us
Yes,
to do that.
Yeah.
But even beyond, it's not just technology. I mean, if you consider this room we're in right now, 3-4 years ago, this was a 90-seater PC lab of rows and rows and rows of where students came in and sat down and they learned how to use Microsoft Word or something like that, and that's good. I mean, it was of its time. Right now, we have a space here that can be configured in any which way that we want, and I mean, the notion that learning happens in 1 hour or 50-minute slots in tiered lecture theatres with one of these projectors and PowerPoint, that is learning followed by a kind of I wouldn't say a rigorously controlled, but quite often it is. We have exams office who set up these kind of summative examinations during certain times. There's a printing office that's waiting for the exam papers to be done, and there's a whole kind of way of learning that's embedded in our administration as well as in our own mentality. So I mean, I think there's an opportunity with Grange Gorman, with the TU, to actually break out of that entirely, and actually physically embody a new type of learning within the architecture, the built environment around us, that is not going to force us into those kind of ways of thinking, I think, so it's I don't know. And I've heard Gary Bartolini from Purdue speak at length about this idea, so I don't know if you're leaning forward there, David.
I just hear you. Advocate for anything. You have this one.
That's making eye contact. Okay, is it Tom at the back?
Yeah.
Tom, yeah.
Okay, I see the apprentice and the tractor have got a bit of traction here. So just to say, I was an apprentice here in 80 to 84. I done my senior trade cert for fitting and turning 2 floors below us in the workshop. No, the point I was just making briefly on that one, just to clarify before we made, I was just saying nothing wrong with driving tractors. It's just for a lot of kids, myself included, growing up in Edinburgh, those decisions were made for us for social and economic reasons. I became a fitter because that was the horizon taken for granted for me, not because I wanted to. So that's the point I was just making, the point I was saying there. The point I was going to say, and just the point, picking up what the lady said earlier, about this sort of realpolitik, are we going to end up with bigger rooms and more classes? I think, I was just reading the Times Higher Education, 50% of lecturing staff are now in precarious employment conditions. So we're talking about, we need to support the students. And I think, and I feel a bit bad being slightly note of caution with a room full of enthusiasm here. But the person who's standing in front of you, he or she may be hanging on by their fingernails financially. And one of the departments I'm associated with, 1/3 of the staff are part-time. So they come in, they work, they run out. They're very committed people, but they really do want to help. I can't remember in my place the last time we got a full-time, permanent, whole-time staff member. For the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, we've had people on very precarious. The staff turnover is big. In some of the universities, you could be taught by a doc student or a postdoc student who's in and out. So I do think, we need to be doing this, and it follows on from Lee's point. You have this information. What are you going to do with it? Well, I think also then, what can you do with it? Because you might just say, we need to do this, and you have some poor 29-year-old who's living 40 miles from Dublin, is spending 2 hours a day travelling and trying to do stuff. So I just kind of think we need to think about the resources that we're going to put in place to support people.
Absolutely, and sorry, maybe I shouldn't be talking, but certainly, you would have seen years ago where someone with a first, you would advise them to go into academic life, and now with someone with a first, you would say if you go into academic life, you can have 15 years of slave labour before you maybe get a permanent contract.
There's an article today, today's Time Higher Education, exactly that. This person spent 15 years or 12 years, exactly.
Have the lady back here yet?
Just a sense of an underlying conversation in all of this, about when you were talking to them there about rethinking education, a bit about the whole thing of negotiating change. So in terms of what I've heard over the past couple of days, I'm trying to reflect and say, okay, what can I do differently now after these couple of days? Like, this speaks of change required of each of us as individual professionals. So to what extent am I willing to change? What is my tolerance of change? Because if this rethinking or this reframing is coming along, it's going to require, yes, the students, they as Gen Z are, change, they're living in an agile and they're adapting to a changing environment. How willing am I as an individual in this space to adapt and change? Do I have the skills to actually do that? When you talk about 10 million, Terry, in terms of, managing individual skills for dealing with change, letting go of what I'm familiar with, and feeling the loss and feeling the fear of the potential loss, and letting go of that and actually immersing into a slightly different space and taking on something new. And even just looking, and today I was hoping to get from these 3 days for myself a couple of actions going out, and I've got from Terry, you presented a lovely one there for me, which was in terms of listening to the students, and the 3 things that you said there about what the students actually asked about. A question for me now, and something I need to act on, is ask myself, to what extent am I offering those 3 things that students are actually looking for? And regardless of what extent I am, what more can I do when next semester begins in terms of those? Because that's obviously going to make a difference. So whether Gen Z, Gen X, Gen Y, to me is irrelevant. It's about what is needed for these individuals who are going to be working in an environment that we have never experienced, and they're going to be out there immersed with different generations. So they could have a boss who is Gen Z, or they could have a boss who is a millennial, or they could have a boss who is a baby boomer or a traditionalist. So when they're out there in the work environment, they need to be able to adapt to those to that area. So really for us, and I think there was Kevin made the point about who's willing to make the change. So am I willing to make a change and do something different? So even for next semester, what one thing, speaking to the technology and the digital piece, what one thing can I bring into the classroom or my teaching space or my practice that will actually be something different? And I might fail with it. And I would show my students, here's failure. But I'm still here, but I've actually failed. We've all learned something from this. So to try and, I suppose, put some of what we're hearing today into, for me anyway, I'm just a big believer of going away from 3 days and having a couple of just actions that I can actually do, because that's where it starts. I'm not going to change everything that's happening in Grange Gorman, but I can do something different, and that can actually have a knock-on effect on others. So really the question for me anyway, for us, is how tolerant am I of change? I might be able to answer that, yes, I am tolerant. how willing am I to do something different walking out of here today from what I have learned from all of these 3 sessions? And I think that's what, for me anyway, listening to it all, and I was trying to really say what's the number, but it's really negotiating change, and my role in negotiating that change is key.
Would anyone like to comment on that, or? Yeah.
This 10 million has got legs. Okay, but it is. I mean, we have been funded for 4 years. But the most important thing is that probably next week there's a call going to go out for funding. And it's what it's actually looking for is proposals. So some of the stuff that we're talking about today, if within your discipline group, if within your program team, you want to actually work together to try and think about and to develop what you're doing, it's your opportunity. That it is, there is actually support there. So if you can, within a discipline group, there's project proposals around discipline groups, developing teaching, learning, and assessment excellence. So it's around enhancing teaching and learning in your own context, in ways that are relevant to you. But there's also opportunities for program teams to look at this kind of Jared coined the phrase, this deliberate design, and to say, well, if we could redo things, how would we do it, and how would we need to develop to be able to do it? Because if we keep looking at things the same way, with the knowledge we have, we're only going to see the same things. So there is that opportunity, and the call from the forum will probably go out within the next week or 2. So it is an opportunity to go back to your institution and say, well, let's try and do something around this. Start spending the 10 million.
10 million cheers for Terry.
I know, but it's 10, and this would be, but there's opportunities every year for the next 3 years in the same way, around the same time. So if you're not ready now, it's just to keep an eye out that there will be.
Very good. We've time for, a couple more.
There's just a couple of things that I wanted to mention. I think what's coming through for me is, and I know I said it earlier on, but it's about the well-being of the students. And a lot of what we're learning about Generation Z, I think, I might be shut down for this, but I think a lot of Generation Z are also Generation Crash. And I think that maybe when they come into the Generation Z part of it, they're used to doing things for themselves and working for themselves, and maybe it's us as lecturers or, facilitators or whatever. So I was going to ask here, I know you said a few things there that you would like as a student. Do you feel pushing the technology to the side a little bit in a class and having more, as we talked about, eye contact and care and time for the students would benefit you or people your age or students in the classes? Or do you feel that's not for everyone? Do you feel that some people would just be strict without their phones or their iPads?
No, definitely, putting the technology aside, because we get distracted so much with technology that you're not able to connect with people when you go out to the real world, that you're not able to sit down and have a conversation. It's hard now if you want to sit down and meet someone for coffee that you're probably on your phone texting or you're on Instagram or something like that, that you have to post the coffee that you're having and things like that. So that you're not able to your phone aside so you can actually have one-on-one interaction. So maybe we can use the technology, but then maybe certain times we have to understand, okay, we don't need today in class, we're not using technology, we're just going to sit down in the group, just have a discussion one-on-one, have an actual proper interaction, because at the end of the day, we're not robots, we are humans, so we do need that engagement also. We need, back to your care and compassion, so you do need to sometimes put technology aside, but it can also help at certain times, maybe facilitate that discussion if those people, we're turning also to more online learning, and people who live in Australia, they're being taught in Canada on online teaching, so they can be also involved in that, through Skype or some other session, so you can use that to assist. But sometimes you do need technology, but not too often, so they can still have that one-to-one human interaction also. Because the pressures, to engage or to be loved or to be liked around society. And you think it's based on the amount of likes you have, the amount of followers you have, but actually until you speak to someone and actually interact with them, that's when you really feel that you have a meaning in life, or you're an individual at the end of the day.
Very good. And I think there's a follow-up question.
Just as you're speaking,
and then we'll go to this.
and back to Terry was saying about the design, I think the technology, I think we role model a lot of the time what we experienced ourselves. So we're used to the lecture. We're used to, most of us are used to the lecture, we're used to that format, we're used to tutorials, we're used to the way it's always been traditionally organised. And I think there's great potential for technology to be sociable, because to describe what you were saying there, Pierre, there's opportunity, but staff aren't as familiar with maybe designing it, that the conversations and that face-to-face discussion in a classroom can be replaced by the technology if what was a lecture is, like to describe it, that goes on beforehand, there's a bit of pre-reading, and in the classroom, students can actually then talk and have that face-to-face. But the technology can enable it by doing that, what was the lecture face-to-face, in the online phase, so that they're reading, they do that piece there, and then when they come to the classroom, they can have that face-to-face and have that discussion. But that's unfamiliar with a lot of people. Some people are used to doing that kind of flipped classroom type of thing, but a lot of people aren't. And I think there's a great potential for staff development in the morning to really help staff to actually design those type of experiences, which allows technology to be sociable. But not sociable online necessarily. It can be sociable face-to-face, but the online beforehand. So I think we need support in those kind of designs going forward. And I think that's not as familiar for a lot of people as it is with others.
Very good. Okay, David, and then this
I will say, I think the support is very helpful, but I also think as an individual, there are things that you can do to get that information from your students in a way that makes you comfortable. So to give you an example, my digital capacity for Google Docs is actually pretty low. I don't care for them. I taught a class that had a significant amount of group writing. Immediately, everybody broke out their laptops. Everybody had a Google Doc. Everyone was editing it over the weekend. They were giving me access. I was looking at things in real time, and I said, there's no way I can go back from this now. So what I did was I gave them choice in how they could do their assignment, but I gave them a structure. So to say you have full choice, I gave them very clear prompts. They had very clear guides. They had very clear expectations of what to do, but the way in which they did it was different. As soon as I saw that, I internalized what they told me. And all my classes going forward, when we're doing discussion in the class, if it's a significant group where they need a lot of writing, we will be doing an easy Google Doc just so they can have it for reference. That's one example of how you can structure things in a way and give your students the choice to tell you how they want to get that information and give you greater digital capacity. And it was small growth, but now I'm compelled, so from our chart, now it's become institutional for me. And so I'm going to be using it quite a bit, and it's going to be relational.
Great. And now we have, sorry, our time is running out, so we have a final point or question here.
Mine's more on the side. David made a very strong point. It struck me. He said, we're here today, we're talking about Dublin. It's really big Dublin, all the people who live down the country. And then Pierre reinforced that when he said to me, when he said, you know, what is a student today? The reality for a student is you're working your ass off outside college, and it's supposed to be the college work as well. But these are realities on the ground. Some students have to travel maybe 40, 50 miles to get to college. But we talked about personal development, delivery and exchange, and that's very important. But also you need structural change. I mean, is there a case now, for example, having a 9 o'clock lecture on Monday, where somebody has to come 50 miles to get to college? I mean, I have a 9 o'clock lecture one semester, and then it becomes 10 o'clock the next. My attendance goes up by about 30% every time. And these are first years. And I remember reading in the New York Times, I found out that teenagers actually need more sleep. There was a study that was done. And yet we have, as put up here, we've boxed people into 9 to 5. I mean, should first year students have no 9 o'clock lectures? So then they can have them in the second year when they're actually in the system. Now these are institutional changes. These are nothing to do with academics lecture. But these are institutional changes that can reflect the fact that students don't come in at 9 o'clock in the morning. In a lot of cases. And that in a lot of cases they may not be there on Friday when they have to travel back to Dublin. Now these are institutional changes. But on the ground, if we look to these, and the students have input in the timetables, I don't know if they're doing that. Should they have input in the timetables? They're the ones who go to the classes, not the lectures. No, we live, so the institutional, if there's an institutional change, I think it'll improve the capacity of the students and the experience of the students.
Okay.
This has to
Just a very quick anecdote when you talk about institutional change. I run some online lectures, but if I don't book a room and put it on the timetable, sometimes it's not counted. Because I'm not physically lecturing. So I might